Hello and welcome to Unlocking Gen Z Potential Strategies for Senior Leaders. By way of introduction, I would like to share that I do work with amazing people, both Habanero employees, but also our clients, and they are of all ages. And so when I hear clients or friends complaining about their Gen Z employees, it sort of bums me out because I feel that they're attributing challenges that they're having with an individual, maybe to an entire generation. What I'm hoping out of today is that yes, you will get greater insights into some Gen Z traits, but also that we can explore what it means to lead in today's very diverse, very multi-generational workplace and how it will be the better for it. So, just a little bit about me. First, as you can see, I'm a Gen X. It seemed only fair that I would be sharing my generation if we're going to be talking about Gen Z today. I've been with Habanero for nearly 24 years, and I've had the great opportunity to work with clients, but also hold some internal positions where I could directly impact our employee experience and help create a great workplace. And so my work today is I'm a senior advisor and I work with our clients on all things people and culture and change. And a little bit about Habanero. We've existed for nearly 30 years, watching and helping people and organizations thrive. And when we're able to do that, and we can see, employees and companies moving towards, their optimal performance, it's a great win for them and a great win for us. And so what this means is we help organizations get human-centered, focus on their people and culture, as well as create great digital workplaces and outstanding customer experiences. So today, we are going to take a spin through some notable Gen Z traits and what their expectations are of employers. But I feel that whenever you start making generalizations about people, it's always a good idea to take a minute and think about stereotyping. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, and that will lead us into exploring what great multi-generational friendly workplaces are and what that win-win can look like for everyone. We're not going to do a live QA today, but if you have questions, please use the question feature in the webinar, and I will respond personally after the session. So let's get started. The question is always, so who exactly falls into what generation? So this data here, we've got the boomers, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, and you can see their, birth years and roughly how old they are, and also their percentage that they make up of the workforce today. This is a bit of a Eurocentric sample of countries, but I picked this based on the likelihood of who most of you, where you are, the listeners, if you will. And so if you are in a company that is in a different geography or you have a global workforce, this distribution may not be exactly what you've seen. And it can also be industry specific. And this distribution is just an approximation, but just so you have a gist. The big takeaway is that right now we've got boomers who are getting near the end of their retirement curve, and we've got Gen Xers who are starting theirs, those precocious Gen Xers who are maybe in some Freedom 55 scenarios. And so with the current and growing loss of experienced workers, this is a time where organizations are definitely focusing on, talking about succession, upskilling, retraining, and generally organizations are really interested in trying to get their heads wrapped around what is it to create amazing workplaces for this diverse number of ages that we have before us. If you're curious, because we were, at Habanero, this is how we look in terms of the distribution of generations. So you can see we're a Canadian-based firm. Mostly our folks are Gen X and millennial, but that is likely a reflection of the kind of work that we do. So just a quick conversation about why even care about multi-generational workplaces, and some of the reasons for wanting to create a really inclusive and open organization as far as ages, but really almost any demographic characteristic. Why do that? One is the increased innovation. When you have a diverse workplace, that means you're bringing together a variety of perspectives and ideas, which is, of course, how you get to greater creativity and innovation. And certainly, individuals from different generations and backgrounds are going to give you unique insights, which can lead to more innovation solutions and products. You've also got better decision making along the same ideas, which is, you've got this wider range of viewpoints, which can help identify potential risks and opportunities that might be overlooked by a more homogenous group. You've certainly got enhanced company reputation, with companies that prioritize diversity and inclusion are certainly more favorably viewed by individuals who are seeking to work there and also the public. You've got more deeply engaged employees. When they feel included and valued, they're more likely to be committed to their work. And then out of all of this, you've got happier and more loyal customers because a diverse workforce can better understand and meet the needs of a diverse customer base. So you've got your increased customer satisfaction and loyalty. All right, so let's talk a bit about Gen Z. And if you're going to be creating strategies for unlocking their potential, it helps to have a bit of a sense of what makes them tick. So I'm going to run you through some traits. It's based on a number of sources, but one in particular I'd love to call out is from a Stanford study from about 5 years ago. It involved multiple interviews, focus groups, surveys, focused largely on Californian and English students. But the really interesting bit of data in this is that they also created something they called the iGen corpus. And this is a 70 million item digital repository of spoken and written language from people of about 16 to 25. And it includes public data from, X, also known as Twitter, Reddit, Twitch, 4chan, YouTube. They even went in and looked at memes from Facebook and Instagram and applied AI to be able to really get a sense of what people, young people were thinking and saying. So pop quiz, see if you know who this is. It is Zendaya. She's sort of a big deal, very talented actor that you have probably seen more and more of late. All right, so some traits. Oldest members of this generation are now well into their 20s. They are more racially and ethnically diverse than previous generations, and the next generation, Generation Alpha, is definitely maintaining that trend. They're the first generation to not know a world without the internet. And so what this means is they've developed some very early comfort with digital tools, which has led to greater sense of self-reliance and also very comfortable with collaborating with people through that medium. This has also meant more access and exposure to people and cultures from around the globe. Now, really interesting though, even though all this digitalness, but their most preferred form of communication is in person. So there's some theories around this, which can include that in-person communication, Gen Zs find it to be more authentic, that they do have digital fatigue because they spend as much time as they do in the interwebs, and that they find in-person communication to be clearer, and it offers more opportunities for real connection. So that's some general traits. If we look at their values and views, financial mindedness is something that is part of being a Gen Z person. These are individuals who grew up watching their parents or older people in their lives trying to weather the Great Recession. So that period of 2007 to 2009 that was so financially turbulent, and seeing those struggles has made them very aware of stable jobs, smart investments, and conservative spending. So speaking of spending, in terms of as consumers, they're very shrewd. They do really like to do their research. They make informed buying decisions, largely using social media, be it either influencers or their own friends that, they have these massive networks, and so they can sort of have a look and see who is buying what. They're also politically progressive. Each generation tends to be slightly more left-leaning than the previous generation. Gen Z is no exception. And so while they do look a lot like millennials on many key issues, they are even further likely to see advancement of LGBTQIA plus rights as a really positive development. They're also more likely to believe that the government should play a greater role in solving, problems like climate change. And also, speaking of climate change, they are more likely to believe that that is due to human activity as opposed to natural patterns. Uh, Under the challenges, mental health is, you know, anxiety, depression. Some people have referred to them as the loneliest generation. Often this is thought to be due to the number of hours spent online, which can really foster feelings of isolation and depression. Also, being as tied to social media as they might be can really lead to these compare and despair traps that are very psychologically damaging. And another challenge is yes, dismay with the planet that they are inheriting. But on a bright note, they also do seem to be showing very strong stewardship attitudes and a sense of, kind of being in this to change it. So if that's Gen Z, sort of in general, the question that is often asked, for audiences like those of us in this session right now is what does that mean for their expectations of employers? So let's have a look at that. Another pop quiz. This individual is certainly even bigger than Zendaya, and this is Malala. So, under motivations, we've got a very purpose-driven group of people. These are individuals who are driven by a desire to make a difference, and they expect their employers to align with their values, especially on social and environmental issues. Highly collaborative, as mentioned. They want a social environment in which to work, and they are feeling less connected than they would like to be to their coworkers and managers. And before you jump to everybody should be back in the office because then they'd all be more connected, I'll speak to that in a second. Also, they're striving for a diverse community to work in because that's a reflection of who they are. And no surprise, they're seeking career growth. And a lot of that is tied to understanding and seeing the relevance of their roles in this bigger picture. And so, what are they looking for from employers? They really value authentic and non-hierarchical leadership. When I mentioned earlier that they have this sort of self-drive, self-reliance, what that can sort of how that can show up in the workplace is more questioning and wanting to be met with much more frankness and openness. There's also less willing to settle if there's a values mismatch, and so they will vote with their feet. They are expecting user-friendly modern technologies as part of their work. So that means that they are more likely to seek remote work because they're very comfortable with those tools. And I hinted at this earlier, but all of this does come down to a very high value of work-life balance, and that they're looking for the choice. And so while, yes, Gen Z they spend a lot of time online and they don't necessarily want to do that. They want in-person communication. They're seeking connection, but what they also want is choice in how they do that. And so work-life balance is rated as strongly or almost as strongly as a desire for an increase in pay and benefits. And they do report more stress and work-related burnout than previous generations, which, as an aside, may be because it's a conversation they're more comfortable with, and so they're more willing to mention it. Overall, the findings are that Gen Zs are slightly less engaged than older coworkers, but they're not actively disengaged. But what this indicates is that today's workplaces do not seem to be fully meeting their needs or expectations. Just another quick view of some data that compares across generations and in terms of what expectations of employers. I think the things to point out here is that well-being is number one or number two across all the main generations of today's workplace. So I think that's telling. And then also ethical leadership is either one or two across all groups. And so one thing to point out here is, what do we mean by, ethical leadership? And some people have said that, for older generations, that's a direct reflection of a leader's personal character. Whereas for younger generations, it might be more a discussion related to how they see leadership when they talk about purpose and values, or employees, people, the planet. Either way, there's a lot of alignment across the generations in terms of these big picture items that people are looking for. So with that review of these traits, I do want to quickly talk about uh, first of two caveats. One is that this is quite a Eurocentric concept, because obviously every region has its own social, political, and economic events that shapes it. And so when you are talking about Eurocentric generational models, which again, as I said at the outset, I focused on this because of likely who the audience is for today. But I think it's worth everyone just having a moment to have a think on how, depending on the dominant culture, there are different ways in which a Gen Z might present themselves. And so, for instance, in communication styles, if if you're in a culture that places much greater importance on indirect communication, maintaining of harmony, you may not find that your Gen Zs are particularly outspoken. Also related to career progression, if you're somewhere that culturally the emphasis is on hierarchical respect, how important long-term employment is, you may not see people making these kinds of frequent job changes that are often associated with younger workers. In a Eurocentric model, that is. From a technology standpoint, if someone grows up in a low to middle income country, that will affect just how much access they've had to technology and how comfortable or interested or in demand it is for them. And so that can also then show up differently for people of a Gen Z age. And then lastly, this idea of work-life balance. So there just may be less of a priority or relevant concern depending on a particular society. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The second thing I want to talk about is this idea of differences within versus between generations. And I think this is really quite a good quote that, in a nutshell, this research and that was published by HBR a few years ago found that the differences between generational groups really are quite small. And the punchline is, you might find that there's more difference within a generation than between them. And so probably best to in that case, just give that a little bit of importance when you are thinking about people in these broad sweeping ways. One final word of caution I want to throw out there with regards to generational differences is, so for instance, this article came out in March of this year. This is pretty common of what you'll find in the media. You can see Gen Z is toxic for companies, employers believe. It goes on to talk about how, Gen Z, they're delusional, they have no common sense or critical reasoning. Okay, but if I do this, I'm just wondering, how does this article land for you now? Somewhere along the way, we've become desensitized to these broad, sweeping declarations related to people's age. And we become and have been much more attuned to other isms, like, say, sexism. But for some reason, ageism, that general statements often are wrapped in, that seems to get a free pass. And really interesting, this is a story as old as dirt. This is kind of a fun Twitter or X thread from Paul Ferry, and it's called A Brief History of Nobody Wants to Work Anymore. And you can see here, going all the way back to 1894, older people have been bemoaning younger people not wanting to work. And when I say this is as old as dirt, I'm not really exaggerating, because here you can see even Aristotle had to weigh in the 4th century BC, saying that young people have exalted notions. They think themselves equal to great things, and they would rather do noble deeds than useful ones. And so in 2019, actually, some scientists at the University of California's Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, they coined the term kids these days as an effect. It's a thing. And so what they found is older generations have this belief that younger people are inferior, that this belief is persistent and widespread across time and cultures. And what they're thinking is that this might be caused because we just generally have rose-colored glasses about the past. And also, we tend to associate in bubbles, and those bubbles are usually of people who think similarly to us. So if you already tend to skew on kids these days, you probably hang out with people who also skew that way, and you can regularly reinforce each other with stories about kids these days. And a close cousin of this whole phenomenon then is this idea of entitlement. Very hot topic. It's probably the thing that seems to come up the most when I'm working with clients and they're talking about their diverse workforces. Is how frustrating that they have found some of their younger employees with their unrealistic expectations around promotions, work-life balance, flexibility, the job hopping, the lack of commitment. But I would like to put forward this idea that maybe they're not entitled, but really what we've got here are some legitimate observations that are influencing Gen Z beliefs and behaviors. And so, having observed burnout in older generations and feeling it themselves, they are really expecting employers to do more of the right thing and to take a different approach to work, whether that's around fairer paychecks, more time off, more flexibility, greater social and environmental responsibility. Gen Zs are looking for that. And they are very willing to work hard for the right employer, but if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then yes, they will leave and go and find other options. The other thing, as I mentioned when we went over their traits, the Great Recession hit them at a very vulnerable time, and this did create these deep-seated feelings of ongoing financial instability and concern. And when you take that and you combine it with the fact that many of them are still living at home because, of course, they can't necessarily afford to move out, but they're of an age that they probably haven't quite started down the track of families, or at least not big families yet. They don't have major financial commitments. They have the ability to walk away. And so, yes, you will see younger employees do that. So here we are. We've been talking a lot about Gen Z in fairly, sweeping statements. And so this is where I would like to just briefly talk about stereotyping, what it is and what to do about it. Now, first of all, I think it's really important that we recognize that stereotypes are a way for us to process information more quickly, and it's based on past experience. There is a risk, of course, of prejudice. And so you can see stereotypes leading to unfair generalizations, discrimination, they're oversimplifications. And so what does that mean then? On a personal level, we're already predisposed to stereotype, but as senior leaders, what can we do for ourselves and for our teams as opposed to sort of burying our head in the sand? First and foremost, get curious. As senior leaders, we can get really used to not having our beliefs questioned by others, or at least not to our faces. And that means we need to question ourselves and situations diligently. And so a great way to do that is that you want to be aware of premature cognitive commitment and fundamental attribution error, which is really a fancy way of saying try not to jump to conclusions. And so if, say, someone misses a deadline, we create stories in our minds about why that happened, what'll happen next. And the stories feel really true to us, even if they aren't, because our brains like to make quick judgments based on limited information. This is premature cognitive commitment. We also tend to think, we do put two things together and assume causality or causation. And this is where you see somebody miss a deadline and you think it's because they're young and immature and inexperienced and don't know what they're doing. But it's just as possible that in fact what's happening is that they are the individual is dealing with a lot at home, or they have too much work. And so rather than just jumping in to these various biases, try and take a step back and ask yourself what else might be going on. So, is it possible your interpretation is wrong? Is it possible you've made some assumptions? Is it possible you've contributed to the problem? And how objective is your perspective? And so, other than this initial theory that it's this person is Gen Z, is there potentially something else could explain this behavior? Once you get curious, you can then start to just take the time to address the specific problem. So we we don't have time ever. Don't waste it on this sort of rumination about generations. Instead, focus on solving the problem and then share your feedback. And so when something frustrating happens, that's exactly when you want to share feedback. If you can do it in a calm way and you can do it so that it's based on behavior, on impact. It's not about somebody's character or personality traits. You want to be objective. The timeliness, though, is probably one of the most important things that you could do so that you can really make the cause and effect come alive for someone. That's where, giving feedback a year later is really hard for everybody. After that, just in general, great for you to work on just emphasizing similarities rather than differences. And this is something that as a senior leader, you can absolutely model, making an effort to see what people have in common with you, but also like in your teams, helping people look at each other with that broader perspective and not what makes you different. And so, listen, relate, look for ways to connect, and certainly work on developing empathy and awareness. Just as a reminder, empathy is different from sympathy. Sympathy is where you feel bad for somebody. Empathy is where you try and walk a mile in their shoes. And if you're going to walk a mile in somebody's shoes, you need to know what their shoes are like. And that is where awareness comes in and curiosity comes in. And then I think maybe most importantly is, yes, share these techniques widely. This is not on your shoulders alone. Of course, as a leader, you have huge influence. And I've talked already about how important modeling is, but definitely this is not just for you, a burden for you to carry. This is a journey for everyone. And so whatever you can do to help your employees and teams develop empathy for each other, so much the better. And so if that's the sort of individual level of, just being aware of and dealing with stereotypes, strategies for creating a great Gen Z work environment would include some of the following. So purpose, absolutely. Like, where is your organization at with the articulation of its purpose and values? Your Gen Zs need to understand and connect with that. And also, is there time for them to explore their own personal purpose and how that connects to your organizational purpose? That is really where magic can happen. Under the heading of leadership, just to reiterate, model that empathy, that openness, that authenticity, vulnerability, and where you can try and look for opportunities for formal leadership skill development in creating more inclusive workplaces. Communication, I mean, through COVID, we really learned the lesson of how employees are wanting more authentic and human and less polished communication. This is no exception. So open, transparent, and often would be the way to approach communication for Gen Zs. Coaching and mentoring, if you have a group of individuals who are all about career progression, this is a very powerful way of doing it. They want to understand what great performance looks like and how to over deliver if they can. They want to know what's expected of them in advance, how they can be in control of their future, what does it mean to succeed. And so providing specific constructive feedback to help them see how invested you are in their success is really powerful. Well, I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is not a nice to have at this point. Certainly for this generation, it is imperative that they can see that they are working in a place that is as diverse as they are in their personal lives as well. There has been pushback emerging in this area of DEI, with lots of organizations saying we've invested so much, we're not seeing the returns. I would encourage you to just examine what your efforts are, and if you haven't been seeing returns, it's probably something about your efforts, not that DEI itself shouldn't be a priority. Well-being, there are the 5 facets of well-being, physical, financial, social, career, community. And so promoting those, really important. This is such a classic instance of where flexibility in terms of hours and location. This is why it comes up so much, because it influences almost all of these facets of well-being. Granted, absolutely not every business model can accommodate flexibility, but if you could just continually critically assess and examine your workplace to see, are there ways in which we could introduce more flexibility, it would lead to a more engaging environment. Autonomy is also so important. Do what you can to create space so that people can experiment, learn, make mistakes, and also find ways to leverage their strengths, how they best they see fit. That also means with what you're communicating, then let people understand the context in which they're operating so that they can make really smart, sound, autonomous decisions. And lastly, technology and tools. So anything that can be done around enhancing communication, collaboration, productivity using the myriad of tools that are available to us now, so powerful. So I also then, I guess at this point, just maybe to drive home, happily, all of this will mean a great multi-generational work environment as well. And so that is a wonderful motivator to do this and to take the time and make the effort, regardless of who is in your workplace. So to sum up, what we have here are Gen Zs as catalysts. So these are individuals who will help you sort of take on all wonderful change that every workplace would benefit from. And so don't get hung up on if there are differences between generations. Wrangle the temptation to stereotype and instead focus on increasing awareness and empathy. And if your Gen Zs push you into some new or uncomfortable directions, look at it as a great opportunity to welcome the diversity of today's workforce, so that you can and your organization will enjoy this innovation, decision making, this great reputation, more engaged employees, and ultimately happier and more loyal customers. And so that's been a lot of information for you to take in. And if you're still wanting more, here are some articles. And so there's an article, there's a book, and then there's a whole list of even more books on diversity, inclusion, and belonging that you can go and find more information on. And then if you're curious in all of this, how does your employee experience stack up for your Gen Zs, or really any of your employees for that matter? Well, you don't need to guess. It might be that a culture assessment would be a great next step for you and your company. So please reach out. I would very much love to see and hear your stories, where you're at, what you're struggling with. And this is an area of great passion for me. So if you just want to talk shop, please feel free to reach out. With that, then, thank you so much for your time and attention today. I hope you have a wonderful day, you have a wonderful week, and thanks for your time.